time now for the week that was. Let's take a look at the top stories that made headlines around the globe this week. We're starting here in Nigeria as President Bola Tinubu on Wednesday signed the Electoral Act 2022 repeal and reenactment bill of 2026 into law, marking a significant update to Nigeria's electoral framework just over a year ahead of the 2027 general election. Now, the new legislation, which repeals and reenacts the 2022 Electoral Act with key amendments, follows weeks of intense debates, emergency sessions, and divisions in the National Assembly. The bill was passed by both the Senate and House of Representatives in mid-February 2026 after harmonizing differing versions, particularly around result transmission methods and election timelines. Well, it seems that we do have a new Electoral Act of 2026 after chaos, unbridled chaos in the Green Chamber this week. And of course, we did also have division in the Senate for the first time. I think in the 10th Assembly, we did see senators have to stand and vote on certain issues, but particularly Section 60 sub 3 of the Electoral Act, which has to do with the electronic transmission of votes, whether it should be mandatory and whether it should happen in real time. Another section which was very contentious, especially in the House of Representatives, was Section 84 of the bill. Now, this section removes the ability of parties to have indirect primaries. It now legislates that parties can only have direct or consensus primaries. Now, of course, what that means is that the Electoral Act is now deciding internal party politics, which our Supreme Court has already previously judged to be within the remit of a party. But, you know, the bill has finally passed. A lot of people were hoping for more from our National Assembly. Of course, there was a lot of pressure on the House of Representatives to hold the fort and stick to the mandatory e-transmission of results in real time from the polling units as they had passed last year in December. But, you know, the pressure on the House of Representatives seemed to be a lot. And a section and a law that was passed by the House very popularly with quite popular support amongst members with very little, pushback, that was passed all the way last year. Everyone thought it was behind them. They're just waiting for the Senate to pass their own and they'll go into conference. And all of a sudden, of course, it was brought back to the floor of the House to be rescinded. That vote to rescind is what people have been talking about. I think people have been talking about it a lot this week, but in particular when the Speaker of the House, Honorable Tajuddin Abbas, put it to the floor whether or not it should be rescinded, and we heard the nays much louder than the ayes, and he said the ayes have it, forcing, that was the first, time they went into closed session that day. That was the first real protest and disruption we saw, but that was not the last. And of course, it all culminated with members of the opposition walking out of the Green Chamber shouting APC Ole. I think I took a video there. I'm pretty sure we have that video. But ultimately, we see that if the minority may have their say, but the majority will have their way. But it does, the question is the majority of the National Assembly aligned with the people of Nigeria, or they're aligned with their party? I think the real consequence of that mass exodus we have been seeing over this last 2 years of members of National Assembly leaving the opposition and moving to the APC, I think we saw on the floor of the House this week, because members were whipped along party lines rather. And earlier I had seen some members of the APC asking the deputy speaker to take it clause by clause, shouting Section 60 sub 3. However, they were whipped along party lines and the clauses were able to pass. Does this give Nigeria more credible elections? I do not think so. We have now codified glitch. Does it give the people of Nigeria more confidence? I do not think so. I think it's now up to INEC to give us guidelines that are very prescriptive and very strict. I also think it's on the opposition. The opposition must not act as the public or as the media or as issuers of commentary. If they do feel that certain things should be challenged, like the opposition lawmakers who came out and said party indirect primaries is a party matter, then take it to court and let's see what our judiciary does with it. We have to test the courts. We cannot just lose faith in the whole system and sit back and be chanting. I think we need everyone in our democracy to invest in it and to test it at the different levels. Of course, we see what's going on in America now. Even the US Supreme Court has hit Donald Trump, but that's what it means at the end of the day, institutions matter and our Supreme Court matters.
Absolutely. I mean, what a week, a week of drama and controversies. But of course, it eventually came to a head with the passing of the bill into law by the president. A lot of people have said that, in record time, the president just, assented to the bill and everything. And my point was, for how long were they expecting that the president will wait, before he signs, the bill into law? It's now a law, Nigeria's Electoral Act 2026, and that's what we will have to, deal with, fortunately or unfortunately. Yes, the law has been passed. It will look as if the lawmakers, and the executive are saying, let's move on, we have a new law. But of course, we know that the conversations around it will not stop. And that's what matters. The parliament of the people is the strongest parliament anywhere in the world, and you can't stop people from talking, from commenting, from debating what what they perceive to be a bit dodgy in terms of a few of the clauses there, about 150 clauses in the act. But of course, one stands out. Clause 60 sub 3, and of course, like you also referenced, clause 80, which dabble into internal affairs of political parties. But I don't think that we should write Nigeria off. I don't think that, in spite of the issues that many people may have against some clauses, particularly 63 in the Act, I think that we should give INEC a chance. And today, for example, will be a demonstration of what INEC under Professor Josh Amukpiton can do in Abuja in particular, because a lot of attention will be on the municipal, local government elections in Abuja, and of course to some extent in Rivers State and in Kano. Elections are not just about what happened on that day. I believe that there are about 3 other layers that people will need to show that, yes, we may have issues with some aspects of the law that has been passed, but then there are 3 other layers. One will be for people to come out and mass themselves. When there is heavy, overwhelming people trooping out on election day to exercise their franchise, the chances of rigging or manipulations tend to reduce, and that's an important thing, which of course we must say. I heard Minister Wike saying that to Abuja residents yesterday in his address to the people. That's what everybody of concern should say to Nigerians, whether it is in January or February or March next year when the general elections will hold. Do come out and exercise your franchise. Stay and ensure that the votes count. But of course, there are 2 other layers, that are also important. What INEC does beyond the fact that people come out is also important. They have to implement the law, and they know what they are dealing with. Again, it is what we see today that will give an indication of what INEC under Professor Amikwiton, will be able to do. And I'm really seriously hoping that there won't be any hanky-panky. He has promised that there won't be, and that they will do that which is right. The other part, of course, will also be that part of the judiciary, because at the end of the day, we are saddled with not so enviable reality that it is the courts that will ultimately validate our elections. We saw it in 2023. We've seen it, countless times. I'm hoping that with a good number of people trooping out, and not just today because of the local government elections, there are a couple of other off-season elections that are coming, but also, more importantly, for the general elections next year, it will be important to see that people troop out and see what INEC does. And then, if it has to go ultimately to the judiciary, part of the debate and the discussion should be that integrity will not be compromised. Free, fair, and credible elections. But then it doesn't end on election day. What INEC does, what the people do when they troop out to vote, and of course what the judiciary will do. A good number of people, of course, are not satisfied with aspects of the law that has been passed, but it has become a law, and that's what we have to deal with. Now that it has become a law, I think that what people should do is to work their way around it. Come out, vote en masse. The arguments for and against are there. And people are saying, yes, Senate says that, what has been harmonized shows that it is mandatory that, results will be electronically transmitted. But there's a caveat. It is the caveat that's the problem. That because they suspect that in areas where those things might not work, give room for human intervention, the form ECA 81. And I don't think that is an impossible thing to do. What is lacking and why people are suspicious is the sincerity of purpose, on the part of those who have amended this law. But then, like I said, it isn't the lawmakers that will go out to the field and deal with the situation. It is INEC. And we will see a demonstration of what they are capable of today, I think, in Abuja, in Rivers, and in Kano.
I think for me, what really stands out is the fact that Form EC8A is now seen as the primary source of information. We've codified that so that means that whatever you upload on IREV is secondary. It does not matter.
Yeah, because it's a viewing portal.
It's a viewing portal, and we've said that that's what it is. So.
All right.
Good luck to all of us.
It will be interesting, because what it means is that elections will happen, if from what the Speaker of the House has said will, most likely happen, presidential and National Assembly, in less than 1 year from today. And that's an interesting thing to look forward to. All right, we move on. The United States has imposed sanctions on 8 Nigerians over alleged ties to terrorist organizations, including Boko Haram and the Islamic State of Iraq in the Levant, as well as cybercrime-related offenses. The sanctions were announced in the February 10th publication by the United States Department of the Treasury through its Office of Foreign Assets Control. The action was contained in a 3,000-page update of the specially designated nationals and blocked persons list, a reference document detailing individuals and entities subject to U.S. sanctions. According to OFAC, the list provides formal notice to persons whose property and interest in property are blocked under U.S. law as part of counterterrorism and other sanctions programs. And that was a development, from the United States. About 8 names, in the first instance, was contained in the list that the American government, the Department of Treasury released, which wasn't a particularly new thing, given that in 2022, they did the same thing about 6 Nigerians who are said to be connected to terror financing or being sympathetic to terrorism, particularly those who were identified to be doing a lot of things in the United Arab Emirates. But now, more names are coming, and the American government is saying that this is how we will deal with it, in terms of your property, in terms of not granting you access to Nigeria, which is a welcome development to many Nigerians that, whether the names are 8 or 2 or 10, and in the hope that more will come, and people are saying that there must be consequences for bad behavior. The part of it that many people will also be interested in will be that what is the Nigerian government doing when the American government identifies and lists, certain names to say that we know for a fact that these people are involved in acts suspected to be terrorism. If they are Nigerians, particularly those that are in this country, what therefore should we do? What should the security agencies do? Are they not supposed to be investigated first and then tried where necessary? It shouldn't end with their inability to be able to go to the United States and then forfeiting assets, property, etc. in the U.S. Those are the questions that will be germane, that after America has done it, even if we have issues with certain names, and we do, there are 1 or 2 individuals and entities who are saying that no, this is not acceptable to us. But again, what will the Nigerian government do? How will you view those that the American government has designated as terror financiers? Those are important questions to raise so that it can serve as deterrent to others who might be in closet still supporting terror acts.
Yeah, so this list I think is very important. What we have here is Sally Adamu, who is said to be responsible for setting up that Boko Haram funding cell in the UAE in 2022. We're seeing members of the Al Barnawi family who are said to be part of Boko Haram leadership. And we're also seeing a man who's said to be partaking in cyber crimes in America and, alleged criminal activity. This is the type of information I think that we need. We need more information detailing people, the roles they are playing, and of course who they are, and where they are, and what they are doing. I think too often in Nigeria we don't speak to the specifics of who these people are and what their roles are. When you look at other terror networks, whether it's the financiers, whether it's those that are helping to train these people, whether it's those that are giving them safety and places to hide, these are the specifics we need. And I do appreciate that what we have seen from the US here is some type of specificity when it comes to the people who are being sanctioned. However, going beyond that, it is also something that we need to watch carefully. As you said, have you rightfully pointed out, Mr. Steve, what is the Nigerian government doing, and where are these people? Are they Nigerian? Are they in? Sorry, are they in Nigeria right now? Do we know their location? Very often now we are seeing more terror attacks spread towards the southwest of Nigeria, spread towards the Atlantic Ocean. And we also have to question our government on this. We were talking about what happened in Borgu just last weekend. Of course, Borgu Game Reserve is part of the Kainji National Forest. It's the same Kainji National Forest that we saw terrorists go to attack Kwara State from countless times, right? We have about 10% of our land in Nigeria is dedicated to this national forest. And we have maybe 3 epicenters. Before it was Sambisa, but now it has changed, and we are seeing people, entrench themselves. And we have to ask if our government is doing enough to prevent this cancer from spreading, from metastasizing and growing, because it's definitely a dangerous situation, and they do need to be tactical. At least now, we hope, as there are more U.S. Soldiers in Nigeria, hope that intelligence sharing also involves identification of more people like the 8 here who need to be sanctioned and possibly tried and put in prison. Now let's move on to the next story, where at least 37 miners have died after reportedly being exposed to carbon monoxide while working at an underground mining site in Zurak, Wase local government area of Plateau State. Eyewitnesses say the incident occurred in the early hours of Tuesday as the miners were extracting zinc. During the operation, toxic gas reportedly filled the mining pit, which the victims inhaled. Most of the victims were young men between the ages of 20 and 35 who had been engaged in routine mining operations at the time of the incident. 25 other miners who survived the exposure were taken to a nearby health facility for medical attention. Confirming the incident, the executive chairman of Wase local government area, Hamisu Anani, stated that the mining site has been secured to prevent further casualties and to enable investigators to determine the exact cause of the gas leak. Honestly, this is a tragedy, but whether or not it is a preventable tragedy is something that we are only going to find out as investigations continue. I don't believe that our mining sites, whether those that are legal or illegal, are known for their safety practices and precautions in Nigeria. And honestly, it is getting overwhelming to have to harper on the sanctity of life in Nigeria. We need to talk about the sanctity of life. I wonder if these people had insurance, how their families would be taken care of, and if there was negligence. Of course,
nobody spoke about that.
Nobody spoke about insurance.
Spoke about the fact that the place has been, shut down. But nobody, which is not the first time that we'll deal with that sort of thing. Last year there was a similar thing, somewhere in Zamfara or something. The issue of safety around our mining sites, it's a concern, and we keep losing young men, to these sort of accidents. But we'll see what happens.
We act at that as though the accident ends where it occurs, as though it ends with the death of these people. What happens to the investigation? What happens to insurance? What happens to better practices or best practices?
To guide against
it happening in the future. We can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome and keep talking about the fact that we're losing our young men. These are young men who are doing good work. You know, you are losing our young men to so many different things in this country, especially in a state like Plateau. We also have to be very intentional and proactive to prevent this type of thing from happening again. You know, I asked about insurance, and I know for some people probably laugh at home, but it's not funny. These are people with families.
The things we take for granted in this country, you know, they're alarming.
It is very alarming for me. So I hope their family, I hope God comforts their families in this horrible, terrible time. But I also hope that if there is negligence, those who are responsible will be held responsible. And I also hope that we start having better practices and insurance and proper workplace protections for all well-meaning Nigerians.
The U.S. civil rights icon, Jesse Jackson, has died at age 84. His family said Tuesday, marking the passing of one of the most influential figures in America's fight for racial and social justice. Jackson, a Baptist minister and key associate of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., rose to national prominence during the civil rights movement and went on to twice seek the Democratic presidential nomination in the 1980s, breaking barriers for black candidates in the U.S. politics. The Jackson family described him as a servant leader who the oppressed and voiceless around the world. Over more than 5 decades, he founded and led organizations such as Operation Push and the Rainbow Push Coalition, advocating for economic empowerment, voting rights, and equality. Jackson's legacy includes inspiring generations of activists and shaping debates on civil rights, economic justice, and political inclusion in the United States. I mean, what a loss, Adesua, you know, the very Reverend, you know, Jesse Jackson, you know, who defined what the involvement, you know, shall we say, of African Americans should be in American politics, you know, many years after Reverend Luther King. Twice he ran to be president, you know, to get the ticket of the Democratic Party. Of course, he didn't succeed, but of course he created a pathway in some ways for the first African-American, you know, President Barack Obama to emerge in 2008. And I recall that evening when that announcement was made, you know, making Barack Obama the first, you know, black president, you know, the tears that Reverend Jesse Jackson shed on that day. And I could imagine what was going through his head. But here we are at 84. You know, he has done his part. He was a friend to Nigeria in some ways. He was a friend in some ways too to Mr. Donald Trump. You know, he was a friend in some ways to many people, and he did play his path. History will be kind to him. History will remember him, you know, kindly. And I hope, of course, that there will be an opportunity. An opportunity was lost with Kamala Harris just more than a year ago. And I see in some polls that are coming out of America that Kamala is still leading in the polls for the potential candidate that the Democratic Party would put forward in 2028. This is all about what Reverend Jesse Jackson, you know, did, you know, many years ago to say that everybody who's an American, you know, deserves to give that office, you know, a shot. We will miss him, and I hope that his family will be comforted.
You know, Reverend Jesse Jackson means a lot to me. He means a lot to me. You know, he's from South Carolina. I went to school in North Carolina. Yes, when he ran for president in 1984, there was no black governors and only one black senator since Reconstruction. To have the wherewithal and the mind to seek the impossible and know that you might not reach it, but that you set the path and lead the way for others. And to see that dream realized in your lifetime in the election election of President Barack Obama is something that's very personal to me, because I do think that what Jesse Jackson was ultimately was a servant leader, was a man who believed in bridges, a man who believed in the dignity of Black people and Black women, a man who believed in also the dignity of Black people, not just in America. He did not look inwards, he looked outwards. He looked at the continent. He came here, he made relationships with people like Mandela, like Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I think Jesse Jackson, for me, was a bridge to that past and a reminder that it was not so far long ago that Black people didn't have the right to go into these schools, as Ruby Bridges is still alive. It's not so long ago that Martin Luther King was killed, as we can see, or that Malcolm X was killed, as we can see. Reverend Jesse Jackson dying, I think maybe makes a lot of people realize how recent it was, recent it was that Black people were not allowed to vote. Simple vote. How recent it was that Black people were not allowed to live in houses. And these wins, these civil rights wins, were hard fought. People died to win these small things. And so when they are getting peeled back in America, whether it's in small ways or in large ways, I think this is a reminder that you have to stay vigilant and that you have to believe in what seems like the unbelievable. For Jesse Jackson to believe that a Black man could be president of America when not a single state and voted a Black man as the governor, no, it shows a sense of purpose. And for him to be able to cross over, to build support, to build, support across different racial groups and across different socio-economic groups, I think that this is the type of servant leadership, this is the type of visionary leadership that as Nigerians should inspire us. As a woman, it inspires me. We still have not had a female governor in Nigeria that's been elected and sworn in. We have caveats with they impeached the governor, deputy, and said. But I think it should inspire people.
Women are in the majority. Vote one in. But I mean.
The APCs did congresses, I think, across the country this week. It begins from the Congress, right? It begins from the party level, and that's why when we talk about the Electoral Act with Section 84, direct primary, indirect primary, consensus. When we talk about the internal machinery of political parties, these are the type of things that hinder women from, but rest in peace to Jesse Jackson. He definitely means a lot to me, and I think a lot to other Black people across the world and Americans. Well, that's all we have for you on the week that was.